This is Mike Knox, and you're listening to the Matt Balaker Podcast.
Hello, good people out there. Thank you once again for tuning in to the Matt Balaker Podcast. I sincerely appreciate it. And I want you to encourage your friends to like, subscribe, share, and just harass anyone you see on the street. Get them to subscribe to it. It'll really help me out. One thing we're particularly proud of on the show is the eclectic guests we have. We've had business people, entrepreneurs, lots of comedians. I think today's guest takes the cake when it comes to the most diverse background out of anyone we've had so far. He's an artist from Pasadena, which is incidentally where I met my wife, so good place. He's an author, stand-up, girl dad, former prison guard who was adopted. Please join me in welcoming Mike Knox to the program. How you doing, Mike?
Good, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So I think, listeners are curious, how did you land a gig as a prison guard, Mike?
Sure. So I initially wanted to write a book, and I was doing comedy at the time, but making no money. A lot of comedians do. So a friend of mine had said, "Hey, you work for the prison? It's easy, no problem." And he was lying. And so I put in all these applications for.
Wait, sorry, time out. So who's this friend, and are you still friends with him to this day?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's the thing about prison. Some people enjoy it, some people don't. I was just one of the people that didn't enjoy it at all. But the hook when you get into the prison is you're making a lot of money, and it was at the time in my 20s more money than I ever thought I'd make. So you really do get stuck there. And that's the truth about prison is you're making so much money, you're looking around at all these other people, looking around a lot of my friends that were in law school that aren't making that same amount of money. Later on, you're making more money. But at that time, I was like, well, where else am I going to go? And then, certain times economies would fall apart or recessions or something like that. So it was at least stability. And at least the main thing was I had insurance. And then when my daughter got sick, it was, thank God I have insurance. Sure. But at that time I was like, if this prison thing's easy, I'll write a book about it, which I did. So that part was good, but it was 5 years of just misery. And I tried everything. I couldn't get out of there. And you just kind of get stuck in this rut. And your whole life does become this prison. You do become just like the prisoners. I mean, it is a totally different world. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. It's just absolute depression. And you're stuck there the entire time.
You're not giving quite the ringing endorsement for.
I know there are people that love it. I too tell everybody, don't go to prison.
Don't go to prison on either side. So I want to learn a little bit more though about the training. So, you're a comedian and your friend suggests, working in the clink. How did they prepare you for the job, Mike?
They don't really prepare you for anything. My friend had said, and my friend, by the way, worked in an Arizona prison, and it was a lower facility prison. And when I signed up, I was like, I worked in this lower prison, and I had an internship with probation, which I was trying to do probation.
Yeah.
But they hadn't hired in like 10 years. And the people there didn't know what prison did either. So this one guy who was like the deputy chief probation had said, "Oh, you went to college? No problem. You're going to be up in a tower. Nobody's going to bother you." I was like, "Oh, great. I'm going to sit there and I can write, everything will be fine."
You'll read Shakespeare in the tower. Yeah. It'll be beautiful.
And the first day that you get there, there's this guy that's been there like 50 years. He's like, "You're going to be on the ground for the next 25 years. And that's what everybody just lies to you. It's like, the recruitment is just lying to you. About how great it is, and it's not great at all. There are people that love it, but I didn't.
There are people that love it, but you don't seem to be one of them. And where did you work? What was your first prison job?
It was Lancaster Prison. So what I didn't realize there was it's really where they discipline everybody. I don't know if they still do. It's been a while since I've been there, but if you got in trouble at other prisons, they would punish you by going to Lancaster. And then when I first signed up, it was a low level. The day that I graduated, they made it a maximum security prison. And I was like reading
Surprise.
I was reading this going out of the graduation, like panicked, thinking this was a horrible choice, which it was. Looking back.
Did you have a martial arts or combat fighting backgrounds, or can you use a gun? Like, did you have any self-defense training?
I did. But I think the humor helped me the most. The human
Okay.
helped me survive. And there's guns that are in the tower in prison, but on the ground, it's insane. But you don't have a gun on the ground. Each yard is about 1,000 inmates, and you've got 16 officers that are somehow staying alive in this atmosphere.
So do you have a stern, pointy finger that you wag judiciously if they act up, or how do you?
No,
How do you regulate?
It's 99% like boredom and with that 1% of violence and pure terror. But a lot of it is, they're screaming at you all day long, threatening. And if you can brush it off and laugh about it and joke around with them, because they're human beings. So they're going to come at you first, angry and upset. And if you can diffuse the situation, you're going to survive a lot longer. So
that's good advice. Yeah. So
they don't give that advice out, by the way. That was just what I learned on my own. Your advice there basically is how the state can't get sued. And so they're like, here's your keys when you get there. Basically, here's your equipment. Go figure it out. So you do figure it out very quickly on your own. And that's what
on the job training. So but you hit on an important point, Mike, this kind of diffusing tense situations. So can you give our audience some guidance on that? Like what is maybe something a prisoner said, and what techniques did you employ to help, lessen the severity?
Sure. So you're going, when you're training, the training is very one-sided. And the thing that I never liked about it or looked at it was you're putting yes, they committed a crime.
Sure.
But now you're putting somebody in a cement box with a lot of times with no TV or anything to distract them. And what else? And you're not sitting down and talking, hey, how did you get here? Let's talk about your past or your feelings or your emotions. No, that's never talked about. So it just breeds more and more anger, and people get more and more upset. And they're sitting in there in that cement box for the most part, just thinking about more ways and getting more and more angry, as we all do. We get upset, you go to work and you come home and you get upset at home, and then you try to de-escalate. A lot of these guys don't de-escalate that. So most of the time they're upset about something else, and then they're taking it out on you. So, they're constantly screaming out the cell door at you. And if you were to take the time, I would tell these guys, just stick a note out the door, and I'll walk around to the end of the day. And if I can solve your problem, I'll solve your problem. And most of the time it was like, hey, I need a roll of toilet paper, because the rules and the policies would be you can only have one roll of toilet paper a week, which I thought was insane. But there are other people that would follow that to the T. These guys aren't allowed to have any toilet paper. To me, that's state property. They can have a roll of toilet paper.
Right.
Here you go. To me, that was the way. And then you do get to know them. A lot of people didn't want to get to know them, but you're forced to get to know these guys. And you don't get any information about their crime at all. You have to go look up their crime. If you get enough, and if it's like a famous person, say, you can go look it up. But then even those people are going, well, why would you want to look up this guy's crime? So again, it's very one-sided. The humanity is completely taken out of it. They don't want to know why the person got there. It's just the whole part of the Department of Corrections is just you're sitting there and you're waiting for when you're going to get out.
Wow.
And everybody's just talking about, and nobody communicates on the outside and vice versa. So nobody's planning to help any of these guys out, really. I mean, they're really set up to failure. And I know a lot of people would disagree with me there, but that's just what I saw.
So it sounds like helping their problems, throwing down some 2-ply every now and again, even if they've gone over the rations, is a good way to help diffuse.
Well, they're not
conflict.
really. Yeah, and they're not really, and these are people that came from horrible places anyways. They're not really, it's not like anybody ever asked me for a flat screen TV or, anything like that. It was very simple things. It was like, hey, could I get a pen? And then they say they asked the guy before me, and that guy gets angry at them for it. It reminds me a lot of me getting pulled over, and the cop is like furious at me. And I'm like, but you pulled me over. Why are you so angry?
Like, I don't know what happened before you turn on the sirens, but you're kind of letting your frustrations out on me, officer.
So that was why I did not like it. It was so much negativity, and everybody's angry at each other. And you have more problems with the people that you work with than with the people that are the felons or the inmates, the guys that are there. So you're just trying to get through the day.
What are some of the bigger misconceptions that people on the outside have about being in prison or working in prison?
The one thing is that all these guys are in their suffering. They're not in their suffering. A lot of it is, surprisingly enough, it's a break from the outside world. And you see these guys recycled back in because and they'll tell you, oh, my old lady was giving me a bunch of problems. My family wanted me to get a job. It's too, and I'm like, you know what, you're right. Why am I working? You're thinking to yourself, you're arrested and all of your license is taken away, your car's, towed, a lot of times you're losing your house, whatever it is. You got to start all over once you get back out. And it is frustrating hey, where have you been for this entire time? And most of these guys have never been through job interviews. That's why they kind of gravitate towards the same jobs that are easier to get. And so for that, to me, it was always, it is hard for them. I do see that side. How frustrating.
So prison can be a break from marriage is what Mike Knox is saying.
I can definitely see that. And it's easy. Nobody's requiring you to do anything. You're not required to do anything. At least in this state, you don't have to work. You can sit there all day long. And that's what it is. You're being fed, and that takes like 4 hours because you're walking everybody to the chow hall. And then you got yard time, which is you go out there and work out, and then you got dinner, and then you go back and you got like, the housing unit has a night. Some of them have nighttime where they're out in the cell block, and then lights out was like 9:30, 10. So
okay,
it's a different. It's not. And most of those guys are on that cycle.
On that schedule.
They're calling it their program. I got a program because they look at it like I'm doing state time. And that's
they're working the program. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the best way for
AA, so to speak. Interesting. So you mentioned you did some writing in prison. Like, what was your process like there?
I had so much time because you do have a lot of downtime. Mm-hmm. And I would try to find other people that were interested in the same things, but I would say there wasn't anybody else that was interested in that. And so I would write, I'd take notes, then I'd take those notes home and put those into chapters because there were just so many stories and so many people. And you just lose track because there's people that are, they're retiring or they're getting, they're hurt, they're passing away, they're committing suicide. So, and it's a whole city in itself. So there's, you've got over 5,000 inmates, but then you also got medical, you've got all of your free staff people, you've got teachers that come in, priests that come in, there's just so many people funneling in and out of there, which would I say that's probably another misconception that you have visiting all the time. And that's where the bulk of your contraband comes in. But everybody wants to always say, it's the prison guards. And maybe it is now. That's not what I ever saw.
It wasn't just the prison guards. It's the teachers coming in, or it's so just the outsiders.
Yeah, because you've got to, you're manning the fences. You've got plumbers that come in. You've got contractors, electrical, everything like that. Yeah.
So you're a stand-up in this very unusual environment. Did you ever work out material in front of either prison staff or inmates? No,
but they would have. They had comedians come there though, and I would be on the yard. But I always kept that separate. It was always. Okay. I would never tell anybody that's what I did. I would never invite anybody. My routine was never about prison.
So all those bringer shows, you didn't have a chance to perform at because you're not recruiting your coworkers. Well, good for you.
I can't. Those guys can't get out anyways to go somewhere. But I was always fascinated when the comedy would come into the prison. That was always cool to watch.
Who came in that you remember?
I don't remember it. I don't remember any comedians. I only remember like Sheena E came in one time. They always have people coming in and
wow.
And, yeah.
I know Jeff Ross has done several prison shows, and he mentioned that there's like no security or maybe like one guard in the back, but it's
because it's usually at a minimum yard. But yeah, okay. It is pretty surprising. You're right there with, that was my biggest shock going to prison for the first time. You're walking into, there's all the killers and you're right next to them and there's nobody there protecting you. It is very odd.
Wow. That's one of those life experiences. I think you have to be there to understand. I can't imagine a Booker show would do it justice. Yeah.
And that is the other side is I could rarely ever talk about it. If I were I remember starting out in comedy and I would first, I thought people would be interested in hearing what I had to say and they wouldn't process it. The first thing I would always hear is why
give us some tit jokes, Mike.
Pretty much. Yeah. They didn't like the fact, I don't know. They're mad that they got a parking ticket. And I'm like, I don't write parking tickets. I worked in a prison. I don't. So yeah, people just don't want to hear it. And I get it.
So you're doing comedy. kind of inspired you to hit the stage for the first time?
Because I have massive anxiety, and it was something that I wanted to work on. That was kind of another thing with the prison, was what was something that I could do that would force me to something that I'd never want to do. And I'd never wanted to work in a prison. I didn't know anybody that worked in a prison until my one friend. And they never really talked about it. And when I took in college courses, they didn't really know about the prison. So same with comedy. I wanted to try it out for myself. And as you start to do comedy, then you're realizing, your fear kind of goes away. A lot of it is getting up on stage and kind of embracing that darkness and the silence. And then you take more steps forward of going, oh, well, now I've got, 3 minutes. Now I've got 5. Hey, now I could do. So it does kind of, comedy does go in blocks of the more that you can do. And I hated every minute of it, and it was hard for me, but I was forcing myself to do it to get up on stage.
So you're really confronting your anxieties head on. What city were you in when you started doing comedy?
Pasadena.
Okay, so did you go to the Ice House, or what were some of the places that you cut your teeth?
The Ice House, there was like this place called the Coffee Gallery. There was Joke Gym in Monrovia. There was Winnetka Bowl, where it was just like you and the bartender. Liquid Zoo, which was a bar.
I think it's still going on. It's got to be 30 plus years.
Yeah, I would just try to go to every place that I could, just to try to get out of I think the main thing is you try to get out of your comfort zone, and see what works and what doesn't. And I do believe if you can get up there and bomb, you're going to be okay. If you can stand up there and not hear anything, that's the hardest part.
So what was your takeaway after your first time on stage?
I think, like a lot of people, is your first time on stage, you do well for some reason. The next couple of times you don't do so well. And actually, I take that back. My very first time doing comedy was in Santa Barbara in Isla Vista, and it was in front of, like, on Del Playa. It was like 100 people, and a band had said, "Hey, get up there and do some comedy." And so I did like a couple minutes.
Wait, you had never done it?
I'd never done it. And I was just so intoxicated that I, I think that's what it is with a lot of comedy, is people go, well, you're funny, so you can thus go do stand-up. Right. And then you kind of realize later on that comedy and music don't mix, so don't ever do that.
Yes.
And so then I started to open for this band, and I was bombing every single time. And then I'm like, well, I guess I'm horrible. And I didn't realize, like, people aren't there to hear comedy. They're there to hear music. It just seemed to work that first time. So then when I started to look to do it seriously, that's when I went to Pasadena and did it.
Okay. And who were some of the comedians you loved growing up, or comics that inspired you?
I'd say Kirk Fox inspired me the most.
Kirk Fox,
yeah,
good one
that I liked the most. And I remember seeing him. I remember seeing Bill Burr at the Comedy Store, and the Comedy Store is always like, it's a kind of a different crowd. I think they're a little harsher on you sometimes. And he had been up there, and he just, nobody was really laughing. And he said, I'm just going to stand up here and wait for you guys to turn around. And he turned the crowd around. I mean, it was pretty amazing. And so that was somebody that I always admired and looked up to.
Nice. So you're working at a prison, you're getting on stage, and you're also an author. You wrote Vivian's Reign.
Yes.
Mike, what motivated you to create that book?
So my daughter got epilepsy, and she started having seizures. And then I started, hey, they're trying to figure, you get kind of in the beginning when you're going through this journey as a parent, you're getting excited because you're meeting other people and you're like, we're all on the same page. And then you realize everybody's kind of working against each other. So the reason that I did write that book was to talk about my experiences as a parent with a child with disabilities, and also because she got a VNS implant, which is the vagus nerve stimulator, like a pacemaker for your brain, which has saved her life. And, I would try to go around to different foundations and stuff like that and talk, and I still do talk about it. And so my main focus now is talking and letting people know about VNS therapy. And she just got her second battery replacement last month. I'd say she's 5 years, 8 months seizure free. So it's completely
5 years. So how old was your daughter when she had her first seizure? Or that you remember? I guess.
Yeah, she was 2. She had no problems before that. I mean, before that, things were, like I said, things were going great. We just moved into our house. I was like pitching a TV pilot, and she had this seizure, and that kind of, I mean, everything was, for the next 6 years, was about focusing on in and out of hospitals with her seizures and trying to diagnose her and find out
Oh my gosh,
what was going wrong. So for a long, until she got that VNS, my wife and I would just take turns like watching her all night long, and you're just kind of sleeping whenever you could. You really tuned out the rest of the world. And that's why I wrote the book, and I hope to, it's cliche, but I really do hope to at least one person to find out that there are people, because I always felt so alone with it, and that that nobody else could really understand what we were going through. And there's no laws in the state of California for epilepsy. So, you know, we've been discriminated against many times because there's no policy in place.
What is that? Like, there are no laws against,
so for example, like the school didn't have to carry my daughter's medication. They didn't have to, they could tell me that I couldn't stay with my daughter during the day because there's no policy in place. All these different places, schools, hospitals, whatever it is, they all follow a policy, which is basically their rule.
The nebulous policy. They're like, yes, sir, it's against policy. Where's this policy? Oh, you can't see it. It's
exactly. So if I went to then try to get an attorney, the attorney would say, well, there's no policy in place. There's no law in place. And that's, for years, I couldn't figure out why nobody was on the same page until I came up with, well, there's no law in place. So I wrote a law, and I met politicians, and nobody cared. And
so what was the law you wrote?
The law that I wrote was very basic, and it was just that teachers had to know what epilepsy was and to identify what a seizure was, because there's no action plan in any schools. So your kid could have a seizure at school, and the teachers aren't required to do anything. The schools have EpiPens for kids, but they wouldn't carry my daughter's rescue medication. I mean, it still is unbelievable to me. She was kicked off her swim team for having epilepsy, and the coach had no problem telling me that's the reason that I kicked her off, because there's no laws that says he can't do that. You know? YouTube, I've seen it on Instagram quite a few times where they're doing fake seizure videos. They're making fun of people. Those platforms allow it. They say there's no policy in place that says that's against that it's against our policy. So they could, in return, that gets other kids at my kid's school to see. They see that on their phone. Well, it's funny, so I'm going to go bully your kid about it. So I had to change 3 schools.
Yeah, I'm obviously you're a loving, caring father, and you're also a comedian. And you, as a dad, you want to do everything you can to protect your child. I understand that, but you're also an artist, and you're part of a community that kind of takes pride in poking fun at things. And so
absolutely, yeah.
I'm curious, like, you know, I mean, do you think there should be, like, because I mean, I have cerebral palsy. I was definitely made fun of it for it as a kid. It's pretty mild. And I would be against something that says, like, you can't make fun of someone for cerebral palsy. I mean, it just seems like sometimes the laws or the rules are worse than the crime, in a sense, because I don't know how you police that. But I don't want to put words into your mouth. I mean, what do you think is the appropriate, I guess, terms of service for YouTube or a Twitter when it comes to epilepsy?
Sure,
jokes?
and I agree. I'm totally for free speech, and I totally agree with that. I just think a lot of comedy comes from your vulnerability, and that's why you're not up there making fun of people. You're letting people identify, hey, there is something wrong here.
You're showing your wounds, so to speak.
Yeah. So I think that there's a big difference between adults making fun of something to other adults rather than you're targeting children. And that's what I think is wrong, is you're saying that it's okay to bully children because children don't know the difference. That you're giving them a very narrow description of what it is you can make fun of now. And so because epilepsy is on the table and nobody's telling them they can't do it, they're going to do it because kids are cruel. So that's the difference. And I do see both sides to it. And I've gone to comedy shows where people have made fun of epilepsy, made fun of seizures. And to me, the way that they presented it was okay. And I have in my comedy routine, I do talk about epilepsy and seizures. It's more informative, informative, trying to tell people, you know, there's 3 million people in the United States that have it. There's the most adults and children in the state of California, and there's no laws to protect them whatsoever. To me, that's jaw dropping,
My first exposure to epilepsy, I was very young, watching, I think, Facts of Life. And one of the characters, gosh, I forget which one, had an epileptic seizure. And I remember being jarring because I was at an age where I was doing so much lab testing because cerebral palsy, it's a brain, I guess, disease,
Yeah,
for lack of a better word.
My daughter also has that, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so I thought that would happen to me. I didn't, because, I say this, Mike, to show my ignorance. I probably shouldn't have learned from the Facts of Life. For people out there who are kind of unsophisticated when it comes to epilepsy, or they're not doctors, please share with us, what is it, and what do you think is very important for people to know about epilepsy?
Sure. Epilepsy has been around thousands of years. It's in many passages in the Bible. And it's basically, it's a brain disorder, and your neurons are not connecting in the right way. What I describe with the product that my daughter has, which is VNS, which is, it's keeping her brain on track. So her neurons are firing in the right way. Every day we're having thoughts all day long. Your mind is going a million miles an hour. Mm-hmm. And for her, it was just, she was having seizures in 4 different areas of her brain. And that would cause her basically to be incapacitated. Well, people look at my daughter and go, well, she looks fine. So yeah. Big deal, but it incapacitates everybody. It affects everybody. It affects her entire life. And my wife and I are constantly having to go, school just started Monday. So I've got to go talk to a whole new group of parents and teachers and administrators and repeat the story over and over and over again, because there's nothing in place that should already be provided for them to understand what it is. And something that's been around for that long. And same with me. The first time I ever heard of epilepsy was on Different Strokes.
Okay. Actually, maybe it was Different Strokes that I saw. It was one of those 80s shows.
Because I've watched Facts of Life too. I want to find that one.
Yeah.
And then ever since, I had no idea. I'd never met anybody, didn't know anything. And now, especially with my job, there's such a huge stigma where people are so afraid to talk about it. And I meet people all the time in Los Angeles that have it, and they just said, well, nobody would listen to me, so I just don't ever talk about it. And to me, that's very sad. And so that's why every chance I can get, I love to talk about it, to try to get people to understand how, for a lot of people, simple things, you can't even go to work. There's people that, they don't have a driver's license, they can't get to work. They can't even there were times when I couldn't go to the grocery store because I'm waiting for the seizure to happen, and I'm waiting for my daughter, and then her recovery would take 2 weeks, because it's not just the seizure, it's
the recovery takes weeks.
Oh yeah. Before her VNS, it would take weeks. A lot of times I would take her to school. She'd have a seizure on the way to school. I would be like, are you okay? Is everything all right? I would take her back home. I'd take her back. Then I'd take her to school. The teacher would be like, well, she missed all these days. The principal would be like, we're on the verge of kicking her out because she's missing too much days. But she had a seizure. Doesn't matter. She's having memory. She was having memory problems because she couldn't remember anything. So it wasn't allowing her to be, these seizures were not allowing her to be a child. And she was on so much medication and just was like a little zombie. And it was so sad for me to watch, where it was about 6 months after she got her VNS, it was like a light switch turned on, and she got up, she dressed herself, all the things we take for granted, fed herself, made her lunch. She said, I want to go to school. She used to never want to go to school because she was so embarrassed of going to school. And I drove her to school that day, and she was laughing, and she was I'd got her this one-liner joke book. She was telling these one-liner jokes. It was a completely different person. That medical device has allowed her to be a child and live her life, which I never saw before.
It sounds like this VNS, or you call it a pacemaker for the brain, was quite life-changing for your daughter.
Yes.
What led to that? Like, how did you learn about it, and what was the process like to decide to have it done?
So it was exhausting everything else. We were first, everything's the policy of the hospitals, if I can say policy again, is medication. So it's always medication. You're always hearing, and we are the guinea pigs of that medication. And that medication would just wipe her out. And she couldn't think. She couldn't have she had depression and anxiety and brain fog and everything. And so we're having all these different tests. She's having an MRI, MRA, everything, building up to this brain surgery. And then they have to induce seizures in the setting of the hospital to monitor it. And that's when you saw the proof, basically, of there's seizures coming from 4 different areas. So now she's not a candidate for brain surgery because they can't go in there to 4 different areas. So that was about 5 or 6 years later, where a new doctor, we had changed doctors about 5 times, presented the VNS. Never heard of it before. Nobody had ever talked about it.
And was this a neurosurgeon, a neurologist?
A neurologist,
okay.
Yes. And that's another thing is what I learned, because a lot of us are perfectly healthy. We never go see a doctor. And so you realize a lot of these are in different specialties. And so it took going to a neurologist who specialized in epilepsy, who hadn't been there the year before, had just gotten to that hospital and opened up this epilepsy wing to focus on epilepsy, because California was basically the last frontier for epilepsy. I guess we were going to a hospital that really didn't specialize in epilepsy, but they would never tell us that.
Like, come here, we know nothing about it, but we'll take your money.
We'd run into that all the time. We know everything. Well, could you give us some sort of answer? Nope, can't do that.
Yeah, it's policy. We don't answer your questions.
Which is the great thing about VNS. It's allowed us not to go to the doctor.
Yeah. So I want to dig a little deeper, Mike. So you exhaust all these other hospitals. Your daughter's not a surgical candidate. There's this technology out there that's it probably sounds kind of wonky at first, and then like, how is it implanted? Like, what were the steps that led up to this decision to actually implant it?
So the decision was just a quality of life. I was totally, when it was presented to me, I'd been up for like 24 hours at the hospital, and she handed me this little like coin size on a wire. And I was like, there's no way this thing possibly could save her, do anything. It looks so small. But then I, went and researched it, looked it up, and I saw it's been around since 1999. It's not a cure, but it was 80%. And I was like, wow, I barely got through college with C's. 80% to me was
C's earned degrees, so 80%.
And I don't know anything about math, but 80% was pretty good. That's a quality of life. I wanted her to go 1 month, just 1 month, to have a vacation from her seizures.
And how old was she during this?
She was 8 when she got it.
Okay.
And the doctor explained it perfectly also, because a lot of it is communication. A lot of times they're going to explain something to you and you're just going to shut down. But she was like, it's real simple. It's going to take about 45 minutes. You get to go home. And
wow.
I still had all those fears and everything like that. And it was horrible going there, and it was horrible telling her, as a parent, I'm like, how am I going to do this? And so I showed her, I bought DVDs of the Bionic Woman, and I showed her those DVDs, and I said, you're going to be the Bionic Girl. And she bought it.
That's badass. Yeah. Being the Bionic Girl, that's
she bought
cool.
it. So I always tell parents, if they have boys, that their kid's going to be Iron Man, which I think is a better example.
Yeah.
But the Bionic Woman was just the intro was so great, where they're building her to be bionic. My kid loved it. So it was the perfect age to sell it to her.
So you framed it in a way that made it easier for her to handle.
Yeah.
What a good dad.
It was very scary for her. I mean, it's still very scary for her. And every day, I'm not saying that it's perfect. Every day is challenges. She still has challenges. She's still got to go to occupational therapy, but we've stopped those seizures that were always there. And
so where you mentioned it's a small device, which is probably good if it's going in your body, and it's a 45-minute procedure, but where does it go?
So it goes in your chest to the kind of to the left of your heart. It can go anywhere in your body, like if you're playing sports or something like that. But mostly,
I envisioned it because it affects the brain, like it had to go in your head or something. I was like,
which is
45.
What I thought also.
Yeah.
And so there's a lead that attacks your vagus nerve. and your vagus nerve goes up to your brain, and there's another one on your other side that goes down to your stomach. So we always hear about gut health and stuff like that.
Right.
She was having horrible problems before that, like stomach pain and insomnia and all that stuff, and all those things are gone.
Poor thing.
Yeah, because that vagus nerve is being stimulated all the time. And it's also a device that is getting approved for depression, which is, I mean, to pull everybody out of the hole of depression, to me, is just amazing. And that's what happened to her, was that she was afraid of everything. I mean, we were just day by day. Is today going to be a good day? You know, you couldn't focus on the future. You couldn't focus on anything. You just, every single day you were living for that day. And that's allowed her to, she got, that battery lasted 7 years. And so she got it replaced in June and continued to be seizure free. And I took, you know, she's working on getting her driver's license, and she's excited. She was never excited about anything.
So she's a teenager now. How has her quality of life changed? I mean, I know it has to, but what are some aspects that you think she would not have experienced, you know, but for this VNS device?
The number one thing is learning. We were told at UCLA by their top neurologist that she's never going to, you just go home. There's nothing you can do. She's never going to live past the age of 8.
Never going to live past the age of 8?
Yeah. She's never going to, she's never going to be able to read or write. She's never going to be able to be cognitive about anything. She'll stop at the age of around 2nd grade. She's never going to get higher than 2nd grade. So learning is huge, her processing things. And she, you know,
Sorry, have you sent this neurologist a postcard?
No, but I do hate him, and he's on my top list of people that I hate. And
well, I mean, we can channel that hate, but hopefully he watches this, and you know, he'll see that. Yeah,
apparently there are a lot of the professionals that are narcissists, so that that doesn't register.
Wait, academics are narcissists? Yeah. Like that? Wait, what? Yeah. No, not doctors.
You've got to find somebody that at least, that was the thing that I got hung up on, was I wanted empathy from people, and you're never going to get it. And you've got to find that doctor that at least can give you something that you can, you know, take home with you and go, okay, this is, you know, you got to look past a lot of their problems, because they're gonna throw their problems on you.
Sure.
Which everybody takes for granted, you know. I mean, most people aren't going to see a neurologist, or 5 of them, you know.
Right. And that neurologist probably has to see 20 plus more patients that day, so it's not the time to just talk it out. You know.
Yeah, and we would wait 5 hours to see this guy for like 10 minutes, and then he'd say a bunch of jargon that I'd be like trying to Google it and be like, what are you talking about?
In English,
and then he'd leave, and you'd kind of be processing that later on. And so my wife and I were always fact checking stuff and trying to find stuff. There's a lot more information now than when we started this whole journey.
It sounds that way. So, you know, at 8 years old, a neurologist suggests, you know, or before that, you know, she won't learn, she likely won't live. But now there's a happy ending now. So what's the reality, Mike?
So reality, she is just able to be a kid and be a teenager and go to school and like any other kid, and you know, come home and, you know, tell me all of her problems that don't relate to epilepsy. And that, I mean, yesterday was the first day of school, so she's telling me all the problems about her teachers and the parking problems that they had and all that stuff. And that's the great stuff to listen to, because I don't.
You're like, normal teenage problems. What a gift. So when you first learned of her epilepsy, you mentioned you and your wife are always worried about the next seizure. How is this device and the treatment subsequent to implanting the device, how's that impacted your life?
It's number one, for a very long time was never sleeping. And then that affected everything else, and it would affect work, and people at work didn't understand. And they certainly didn't care. And so it's allowed me to sleep, and allowed my wife to sleep a full 8 hours, which we weren't getting for a very long time. And basically that's it. I don't ask for a lot out of life. And I will tell people that I'm so thankful that I can now get 8 hours of sleep.
You can get 8 hours of sleep, and you get the fun drama of having a teenage daughter.
That's okay. That's as long as
14 years ago, that hearing about boys or whatever lays in store, you'll be well equipped to handle that. That's wonderful.
when it's funny because when people at my office will talk about their kids and how they can't control them and all this other stuff, and my kid's great. I don't have any of those problems. She is perfect in that way. She has, meltdowns and stuff like that, like any other kid. But I am just so thankful that she's a healthy kid. And I think a lot of people don't look at it that way because we do get distracted by what's going on in life and what especially what other people are telling us we should be focused on. And that was kind of it was a blessing in disguise because we were able to, all we could do was focus on her health at that time, especially the younger years. We didn't have time for all the other nonsense that's
right. It gave you an immediate purpose and everything else was on the sidelines. So
total purpose. Yes.
What guidance or advice do you have for parents or people who have loved ones with epilepsy?
My number one thing is to do your own research and not to, we got so much bad information and it might be coming from the right place, but do your own research and really get rid of, you're going to have family members that come at you crazy and they're well-intended. They love you. I know, but they're not right now doing the right thing to you. So you're going to see a lot of friends that disappear, a lot of family that you don't talk to anymore because of it. And the best thing is just to do your own research and focus on what's important, which is your health. And I think that's with anything in life. I mean, I see so many people now as I get older that you don't prepare for it. And then, oh my God, it's here. And you're taking up golf, because you haven't prepared for anything.
Right.
And that is, every day is maintain. I mean, life isn't the greatest thing, but every day try to maintain. And to me, it really was, I'm focusing on my family and that's what's helped me get through it. And that's when I have the worst days, I just think it could be so much worse.
That's good perspective. Well, where can people learn more about you, the book, your stand-up, whatever it is you want to drive traffic to?
Sure. Probably the best place is MikeKnox.com. It's got everything connected to it. There's a great community for anyone with epilepsy or seizures that's on Twitter. I think I'm Mike Knox Comedy on there. I can't even remember what it is. And TikTok.
Yeah, we'll put your Twitter handle up so you can follow Mike on Twitter.
And then TikTok is Famous Graves, which I go and film famous graves, celebrity graves. And it might sound morbid, but we all end up in the same place. And it's more of a way to honor the celebrities that I always admired.
Very cool. Well, Mike Knox, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.